Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The content provided in this video series is for educational, historical, and entertainment purposes only. The discussion of the divorce journey, legal separations, psychological impacts, and financial or property divisions as reflected through the lens of U.S. art history does not constitute legal, financial, mental health, or professional counseling advice. Every personal, financial, and legal situation is unique, and viewers should conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified, licensed professionals regarding their specific circumstances. When we look at the multi-million-dollar masterpieces hanging on the walls of the Museum of Modern Art or the Whitney, we are often told we are looking at pure form, line, and color. We are taught to appreciate the genius of American abstraction through a detached academic lens. But what if I told you that some of the most celebrated canvases in U.S. art history are not actually abstract exercises at all? What if they are the literal, raw, and bleeding architectural blueprints of marital ruin? Consider the historical trends of mid-century America. Long before the advent of modern no-fault divorce laws, the dissolution of a marriage in the United States was a high-stakes adversarial bloodbath. To secure a legal separation, citizens were forced to prove extreme cruelty, abandonment, or infidelity in a public courtroom. It was a system that demanded a theatrical display of fault, leaving the psychological reality of the partners completely shattered. While the legal documents of the era filed in archives across New York, California, and Illinois recorded clinical testimonies of broken contracts, American artists were building a parallel archive. They were using the radical language of abstract expressionism, post-minimalism, and neo-expressionism to document the true, unedited, and terrifying emotional trajectory of the divorce journey. There is a profound historical case study from 1956 involving a canvas that served as an eerie, nonlinear premonition of a catastrophic domestic ending, painted months before the moving trucks arrived and the legal petitions were drafted. The brushstrokes themselves held a specific, aggressive velocity that spoke to an inescapable truth. The domestic sphere was imploding. By examining these hidden visual codes, we unlock an entirely new way of understanding the American experience. This brings us to a critical open loop that will thread through all 10 parts of this masterclass. How did a group of radical American visual artists manage to hide the step-by-step psychological stages of marital grief, asset alienation, and identity reconstruction right in plain sight, completely fooling the conservative art critics of their time? For the contemporary U.S. audience, this exploration addresses a deeply pervasive modern problem. In our current society, the experience of divorce is frequently reduced to a sterile, administrative, and deeply isolating bureaucratic process. It is measured in legal fees, real estate liquidations, custody schedules, and mediation sessions. The system is designed to process the logistics, but it completely abandons the human soul. It leaves individuals feeling disoriented, fragmented, and stripped of their narrative history. This deep dive masterclass solves that precise problem of isolation and clinical sterility. By journeying through the abstract interpretations of the divorce path in U.S. art history, we are giving you a profound, historically backed vocabulary to understand the unutterable. You will discover that the feelings of erasure, chaotic anger, terrifying void, and eventual hard-won autonomy are not signs of personal failure, but are instead part of a grand historic tradition of American creative reinvention. This series will teach you how to read the hidden language of trauma, boundary making, and ultimate liberation within abstract masterpieces, transforming how you view both cultural history and personal life transitions. To truly comprehend how abstract art became the ultimate vessel for the divorce journey, we must first analyze the monumental shift in how partnerships were visualized in American culture. For generations, U.S. art was dominated by representational portraiture that reinforced the myth of the unbreakable, idealized nuclear family. Canvases featured clear, sharp lines, balanced lighting, and structured spaces where husbands and wives stood as pillars of societal stability. But as the mid-20th century approached, the internal reality of many American households began to clash violently with this external perfection. When the emotional and legal bonds of a marriage begin to fracture, representational art simply lacks the capacity to capture the internal wreckage. You cannot paint a realistic portrait of a fading sense of self. You cannot use traditional landscape techniques to depict the total disorientation of a changing domestic reality. This is exactly where abstraction stepped in as a revolutionary tool. Through historical trends, we observe that American abstraction allowed creators to bypass the censorship of polite society and the rigid requirements of the legal system. On an abstract canvas, a jagged black line tearing through a field of pristine white paint ceases to be just a mark. It becomes the visual manifestation of a sudden domestic rupture. The choice of materials also shifted dramatically during these periods of relational crisis. Artists moving through the painful chapters of separation routinely abandoned traditional, refined oils in favor of raw industrial materials. They turned to house paint, rusted steel, torn fabrics, and discarded domestic objects, using the very textures of decay to mirror the dismantling of their shared lives. Throughout this 10-part masterclass, we will meticulously unpack specific case studies that illustrate this phenomenon across different eras of U.S. history. We will analyze the explosive gestural battles fought on canvas during the height of the New York School, where the paint was applied with such force that it functioned as a substitute for the screaming matches that could not be aired in public without legal consequence. We will examine the cooler, more calculated geometries of the 1970s, where artists used minimalist structures to process the cold, stark realities of asset division and the drawing of new rigid personal boundaries. We will also look at late 20th century installation art, where the literal spaces of the home were systematically sliced apart, offering a visceral commentary on the physical alienation that accompanies the end of a union. The divorce journey is never a single event. It is a complex, multi-stage evolution. It begins with the subtle internal tremors of misalignment, moves into the chaotic explosion of the actual break, passes through the silent, agonizing void of loneliness, and eventually culminates in the painstaking assembly of a brand new identity. Each of these stages possesses a distinct visual counterpart in the world of abstract art. By the time we complete this 10-part investigation, you will possess the ability to walk into any major art museum in the United States and decode the profound human dramas hidden within the abstract collections. You will see that these artists were not just playing with aesthetics, they were surviving. They were using the canvas as a sanctuary, a courtroom, and a laboratory for rebuilding their lives from the ground up. Let us begin this journey by stepping directly into the mid-century crucible, where the first major cracks in the American domestic ideal were permanently crystallized into paint. To understand this mid-century crucible, we have to look at the years immediately following World War II, an era when the United States public was consuming a hyper-sanitized narrative of marital bliss and domestic perfection. The post-war boom demanded compliance, stability, and the preservation of the nuclear family at all costs. Yet beneath this glossy surface, a profound psychological crisis was brewing. Imagine an average American citizen living in the current year 2026. Let us call him John. John walks into a contemporary museum and stops before a massive canvas painted in 1952. To an untrained eye, it appears to be nothing more than a chaotic tangle of black lines, erratic drips, and violent slashes of crimson. John might assume he is looking at a generalized response to the nuclear age or a simple exercise in formal aesthetics. But if John understands the step-by-step architecture of a failing marriage, a completely different reality comes into focus. He is not looking at an accident. He is looking at the exact visual transcription of an emotional fracture, recorded in real time long before the legal paperwork could ever be filed. During this historical period, obtaining a divorce in the United States was a punishingly difficult endeavor. The legal system required proof of a specific matrimonial offense, such as adultery or extreme cruelty. This meant that before a couple could legally separate, they had to engage in a public display of hostility, turning their private misery into an adversarial courtroom spectacle. For many American artists, this repressive legal framework made the canvas the only safe haven for processing the genuine trauma of a dying relationship. They could not speak the truth in public without risking social ruin, so they hid the truth in plain sight within the dense layers of abstract compositions. Let us look at a vital historical case study involving the legendary abstract expressionist painter Lee Krasner. In the mid-1950s, Krasner was locked in a deeply volatile marriage with Jackson Pollock at their home in Springs, New York. The relationship was buckling under the weight of alcoholism, infidelity, and professional jealousy. Krasner was trapped in a domestic space that had transformed into a psychological battleground. In the months leading up to the cataclysmic end of their union in 1956, Krasner began working on a canvas that would eventually be titled Prophecy. If we examine the creation of Prophecy step by step, we can see how the abstract process mimics the subconscious realization of a marital ending. Krasner did not set out to paint a divorce. Instead, she allowed her brush to be guided by the raw, unedited friction of her domestic life. The canvas became dominated by fleshy, bulbous shapes that seem to be violently twisting and tearing away from one another. Heavy, dark, anatomical outlines cut through the composition, creating a sense of claustrophobia and internal rupture. The paint is thick, labored, and aggressive, applied with a velocity that speaks to an underlying panic. Krasner herself was so unsettled by what she had unleashed on the canvas that she could not bear to look at it, leaving it turned against the studio wall. It was a non-linear premonition of the total collapse of her marriage, painted just months before Pollock's fatal car crash shattered their world forever. This case study demonstrates how abstract art can capture historical trends of relational trauma, with a precision that clinical language simply cannot match. Another striking example of this phenomenon is found in the work of Willem de Kooning during his highly tumultuous marriage to Elaine de Kooning. In the early 1950s, Willem embarked on his famous Woman series. While art critics of the era focused heavily on the formal qualities of the brushwork or interpreted the imagery as a universal commentary on the feminine archetype, a closer look reveals a deeply personal, abstract deconstruction of the marital partner. Imagine the psychological toll of living in a state of perpetual relational warfare. Willem did not depict his spouse with the gentle, idealized lines of traditional American portraiture. Instead, the figures on his canvases are aggressively fractured, their faces dissolving into predatory grins and their bodies slashed by thick, violent strokes of house paint. The domestic background of the paintings merges seamlessly with the figures, suggesting that the home itself has become a source of physical and emotional threat. This step-by-step dismantling of the human form serves as a profound abstract interpretation of how a partner can become entirely alien and unrecognizable when a marriage enters its final, destructive phase. For our modern observer John in 2026, analyzing these historical trends offers a powerful realization regarding the potential outcomes of his own life transitions. The first stage of the divorce journey is almost always characterized by a profound loss of visual and emotional coherence. When a marriage is stable, the individuals possess a structured narrative. There is a clear composition to their daily existence. But when the foundation cracks, that composition suffers a total collapse. Abstract expressionism became the perfect vehicle for this stage because its very core definition relied on the rejection of predetermined structure. Consider the specific visual vocabulary that mid-century American artists developed to communicate this internal decay. First, there is the phenomenon of the bleeding edge. In a balanced abstract painting, colors and shapes maintain a certain spatial integrity. But in paintings produced during times of intense marital strife, we see a deliberate violation of boundaries. One color palette will violently invade the territory of another, mirroring the way personal boundaries are eroded in a failing relationship where privacy and autonomy have completely evaporated. Second, these artists introduced discordant textures into their work. They began mixing traditional oils with coarse sand, dirt, glass, and industrial enamels. This was not merely an aesthetic experiment, it was a tactile representation of friction. The literal roughness of the canvas surface became a physical stand-in for the abrasive daily interactions, the cold silences, and the unyielding tension that defines the domestic environment prior to an official separation. Third, we see the radical use of erasure. Artists like Joan Mitchell during the late 1950s utilized a technique where paint was aggressively scraped away from the canvas with palette knives, exposing the raw, unprimed fabric underneath. This act of scraping represents the psychological desire to erase the shared history, to wipe away the presence of the other person, and to cope with the terrifying sensation that one's own identity is being systematically stripped away by the conflict. Mitchell's canvases from this period often feature a dense, suffocating knot of dark, tangled brushstrokes right in the center of the painting, surrounded by a vast, stark, and empty white void. The composition perfectly captures the dual nature of the early divorce journey, the feeling of being utterly choked by the density of the immediate conflict, while simultaneously facing a terrifying wide-open expanse of isolation. Let us also consider the case study of Grace Hartigan, another monumental figure in the New York art scene. Hartigan openly defied the societal expectations placed on women in the mid-20th century, navigating multiple divorces at a time when the dominant cultural narrative condemned independent women to the margins. In her work from the late 1950s, such as New England October, we see a radical shift away from recognizable street scenes into a highly fractured, tempestuous abstraction. The color palette shifts from vibrant, celebratory tones into deep, bruised ochres, violent oranges, and suffocating blacks. If we track her creative process step by step, we see an artist intentionally destabilizing the canvas. The brushstrokes do not create a resting place for the eye. Instead, they force the viewer into a state of perpetual motion and disorientation. This was the exact artistic translation of her lived experience, a visual record of the emotional vertigo that accompanies the total dismantling of a domestic life. Hartigan's work proves that abstraction was not an escape from reality, but rather the only medium capable of confronting the sheer velocity of personal upheaval. These mid-century masterpieces show us that long before the legal system created mechanisms to handle the logistics of a split, American artists were using the language of abstraction to build a sanctuary for the human soul. They proved that the chaos of a breaking life could be transformed into a structured, historical record of human resilience. But what happens when this initial internal friction can no longer be contained within the subconscious mind? What happens when the premonition turns into an undeniable reality, and the physical separation officially begins? The true explosion occurs when the artists stop merely registering the pain and start actively mapping the cold, calculated logistics of dividing a life. This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the stage for the next phase of our masterclass. In the next part, we will move out of the chaotic, paint-splattered studios of the 1950s and step directly into the stark, clinical, and revolutionary world of the 1960s and 1970s minimalism movement. We will uncover how American artists began using razor-sharp lines, severed materials, and sliced-open installations to map out the brutal step-by-step legal realities of asset division, the drawing of rigid new boundaries, and the terrifying process of physically splitting a single home into two entirely separate universes. This brings us directly into the late 1960s and early 1970s, an era when the legal and social landscape of the United States experienced a seismic transformation. In 1969, California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act, which officially took effect on January 1, 1970, introducing the nation to the concept of no-fault divorce. Within a few short years, this legislative shift swept across nearly every state in the Union. Historical trends demonstrate that this completely re-engineered how the United States public experienced the end of a marriage. The older, messy, emotional requirement of proving a specific marital sin in open court was instantly replaced by a cold, bureaucratic, and highly mechanized process. Marriages were no longer viewed as sacred, unbreakable spiritual covenants. Instead, they were treated as business contracts that could be dissolved through clinical litigation, objective property distribution, and the systematic division of shared assets. This massive societal shift perfectly mirrored a radical revolution occurring within U.S. art history. As the messy, emotional, paint-splattered canvases of abstract expressionism faded from the cultural spotlight, a new generation of American artists emerged who rejected emotional outbursts entirely. They turned instead to minimalism and post-minimalism, movements defined by industrial materials, rigid geometric grids, hard edges, and absolute serial repetition. While mainstream art critics analyzed these works as pure investigations of spatial dynamics, these sterile forms actually functioned as the perfect abstract containers for the newly clinical reality of the American divorce journey. To see how this operates in the modern era, imagine an American woman named Sarah living in the current year 2026. Sarah is currently navigating a highly complex, corporate mediation process to dissolve her own 15-year marriage. She walks into a contemporary art gallery and stands before a massive minimalist installation consisting of 12 identical, cold-rolled steel boxes arranged in a precise, unyielding grid on the gallery floor. To a casual viewer, it is nothing more than an exercise in industrial fabrication. But to Sarah, who is actively experiencing the cold alienation of modern asset division, this grid takes on a terrifyingly precise meaning. It represents the absolute serialization of her life. It is the visual manifestation of an asset distribution spreadsheet, where years of shared memories, domestic spaces, and emotional investments are stripped of their humanity and forced into neat, unfeeling, separate columns. This brings us to a profound historical case study from 1974 that stands as the ultimate abstract monument to the physical dismantling of the American marital home. The artist Gordon Matta-Clark traveled to a suburban neighborhood in Englewood, New Jersey, where he acquired an abandoned, typical two-story wood-frame family home. Using a heavy-duty, handheld chainsaw, Matta-Clark performed a piece of radical architectural surgery that he simply titled Splitting. If we analyze the execution of Splitting step by step, we can see how it serves as a literal and abstract map of a domestic rupture. In step 1, Matta-Clark drew a perfectly straight vertical line down the exact center of the house, cutting through the roof, the second-floor bedrooms, the first-floor living spaces, and the exterior siding. In step 2, he used structural jacks to slowly lower one half of the entire house by a few degrees, beveling the rear foundation blocks. The potential outcomes of this architectural manipulation were staggering. The house was quite literally cleaved into two distinct, separate entities that could no longer function as a unified whole. When you look at the photographs and film documentation of this abstract masterpiece, the true psychological depth of the work becomes undeniable. The staircase, which once served as the central artery connecting the family members as they moved through their daily routines, was split perfectly in two. A vertical chasm of empty air and blinding sunlight poured into the dark, intimate interiors of the bedrooms and closets. Clark had effectively exposed the private, hidden anatomy of the domestic sphere to the cold gaze of the outside world. This step-by-step bisection of a physical structure captured the exact emotional vertigo that occurs when a legal decree instantly transforms a single, shared domestic universe into two completely separate, alienated environments. It showed that when a marriage splits, the architecture of the self is permanently altered, leaving open wounds where stability used to reside. While Clark was physically slicing houses in half, other American minimalist artists were using the concept of the grid to process the agonizing step-by-step requirement of boundary drawing. When a relationship collapses under the weight of the new 1970s legal frameworks, survival depends on the immediate enforcement of rigid personal and spatial boundaries. You must transition from a state of fluid, overlapping emotional vulnerability into a state of hyper-regulated compartmentalization. Consider the historical trends found in the work of Agnes Martin during this exact era. Martin spent years creating large, square canvases covered in incredibly faint, meticulously drawn graphite grids over washed-out acrylic backgrounds. If you examine these works from a distance, they appear to be completely blank, uniform surfaces. But as you step closer, the hyper-precise, repetitive lines become visible. Each tiny rectangle within the grid is isolated from its neighbor by an unyielding pencil line. This creative process represents the psychological defense mechanism of the individual, undergoing a profound separation. The grid is an act of supreme emotional containment. It is the visual blueprint of a court-mandated custody schedule, or a highly structured property agreement. By forcing the chaotic, swirling trauma of a life transition into millions of tiny, strictly regulated compartments, the artist, and by extension the viewer, reclaims a sense of absolute control over an otherwise cataclysmic emotional landscape. We see this same rigid defense mechanism manifested through a different set of potential outcomes in the high-stakes, dangerous minimalist sculptures of Richard Serra. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, Serra began creating his famous prop pieces. These installations consisted of massive, lead plates and heavy steel pipes that were not welded, bolted, or glued together in any way. Instead, they relied entirely on the continuous, opposing forces of gravity, weight, and physical tension to stay upright. In works like One-Ton Prop, for heavy lead plates are balanced against one another in a freestanding card house structure, held together by nothing but their own sheer mass. This brings us to a critical step-by-step understanding of the financial and legal negotiations that define the midpoint of the divorce journey. When two parties enter a legal dispute over significant assets, real estate portfolios, or parental rights, the emotional atmosphere becomes a literal manifestation of Serra's prop pieces. It is an environment defined by immense, unseen pressure and terrifying, precarious balance. Each side exerts a massive amount of weight against the other. If one party pulls back, if one legal clause shifts by a fraction of an inch, or if the financial tension becomes unmanageable, the entire structural illusion of stability collapses into a heap of destructive, crushing metal. Serra's abstract work proves that minimalism was never just a cold, academic game of shapes. It was an incredibly high-stakes exploration of the invisible, dangerous forces that keep a broken structure from completely imploding during a period of total relational vulnerability. The transition from the fluid chaos of the 1950s into the hyper-regulated, industrial geometry of the 1970s shows us that the American art world was constantly evolving to provide a mirror for the evolving legal and psychological realities of the United States public. But what happens when these rigid boundaries, these clean lines, and these cold industrial materials are no longer enough to contain the hidden pain of the individual? What happens when the clinical processing of a divorce fails to heal the deep, internal wounds of identity erasure, and the human spirit demands a violent, visceral reclamation of the physical body and the narrative? This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the perfect stage for the next critical chapter of our deep dive masterclass. In the next part, we will leave behind the cold, silent steel grids of the minimalist movement and step directly into the explosive, raw, and highly controversial world of the 1980s neo-expressionist and feminist art explosion. We will uncover how a group of radical American women artists used broken plates, slashed fabrics, and visceral bodily performances to physically rip the mask off the clinical divorce process, sparking a revolutionary era of creative rebirth and total self-reclamation. To step into the 1980s is to witness an absolute explosion of raw emotional scale within the American landscape. Historical trends reveal that by 1981, the divorce rate in the United States reached its highest recorded peak in modern history, skyrocketing to 5.3 per 1,000 people. This meant that millions of American households were actively dismantling themselves simultaneously. While the 1970s had attempted to institutionalize and sanitize this painful process through cold legal frameworks and no-fault legislation, the 1980s witnessed the severe psychological blowback of that clinical approach. The human psyche could no longer be contained within sterile steel grids or neat mediation spreadsheets. The United States public was ready for a visceral, chaotic, and completely uncompromising reclamation of the emotional self. The art world responded by completely abandoning the quiet restraint of minimalism and throwing itself into the turbulent, aggressive world of neo-expressionism and radical feminist art, creating the ultimate visual archive of relational warfare. Consider an American corporate professional named Amanda living in the current year 2026. Amanda has just finalized an incredibly exhausting, multi-year legal separation that left her financially intact but emotionally hollowed out. The legal system processed her assets, divided her real estate, and scheduled her parental time with clinical precision, yet it left her feeling completely anonymous and unexpressed. Amanda walks into a major urban museum and finds herself standing before a monumental canvas from 1982. The painting is massive, heavy, and violently textured, protruding far out into the gallery space. It does not offer the clean lines of a court order. Instead, it is a turbulent sea of jagged shards, heavy impasto paint, and torn materials. For Amanda, this is the very first time her internal reality has been accurately mirrored. She is looking at the visual language of neo-expressionism, a movement that allowed American artists to take the internal, invisible shrapnel of a collapsed marriage and turn it into a physical monument. Let us unpack a profound historical case study from this era that perfectly illustrates this physicalization of trauma: the emergence of Julian Schnabel's iconic plate paintings in the early 1980s. Imagine if you were to look at the literal construction of these works step by step. Schnabel did not merely apply paint to a flat surface. In step 1, he gathered thousands of ordinary ceramic dinner plates. In step 2, he violently smashed them into thousands of jagged, unpredictable shards. In step 3, he used heavy industrial polyester resin to fuse these sharp, dangerous fragments onto massive wooden panels. Only then, in step 4, did he apply aggressive sweeping gestures of paint across this treacherous terrain. While mainstream art critics of the era often contextualize this as a hypermasculine redefinition of painting, the underlying abstract interpretation of the domestic journey is staggeringly profound. The dinner plate is the ultimate universal symbol of domestic stability, shared family meals, and marital routine. It is the literal vessel around which the family structure congregates every single day. By systematically smashing these symbols of the home and cementing them into a chaotic, unyielding mosaic, Schnabel created a literal topography of domestic wreckage. If we analyze the potential outcomes of this technique, we see that you cannot look at the painting without navigating the sharp, dangerous edges of the broken ceramics. The paint sits precariously on top of a shattered foundation, mirroring the exact psychological reality of trying to maintain a coherent identity while your private, domestic foundation is entirely fractured. This brings us to the radical work of Elizabeth Murray, an artist who directly confronted the hidden tensions of the domestic sphere through highly innovative, shaped canvases during this exact decade. Murray's work provides a vital case study in how to visualize the psychological strain of a failing relationship through abstract geometry. Unlike traditional square or rectangular paintings, Murray's canvases were constructed from multiple interlocking, warped wooden panels that physically twisted and bulged away from the wall. In her masterpiece More Than You Know, painted in 1983, we see an extraordinary abstract interpretation of intense domestic grief and marital strain. The composition features the heavily abstracted shapes of a room, a chair, and a table, but they are violently distorted, bending as if subjected to immense atmospheric pressure. A massive biomorphic shape, resembling an elongated, weeping figure or a ghostly presence, dominates the center, stretching across the fractured panels. If we analyze Mai's technical execution step by step, we see that she did not just paint a broken home. She physically broke the structural framework of the canvas itself. The seams where the wooden panels meet are left exposed, creating literal fault lines running through the entire artwork. This structural fragmentation represents the potential outcomes of long-term marital strain, where the familiar, everyday objects of the home become sources of profound emotional vertigo and alienation. The kitchen table is no longer a stable, flat plane. It is a broken, tilted axis from which everything is sliding away. Simultaneously, the feminist art movement in the United States was executing its own radical, step-by-step deconstruction of the traditional marital narrative. Artists like Miriam Shapiro pioneered a technique known as femage, which involved collaging traditional domestic textiles, lace, wedding dress fabrics, and patterned linens into massive, abstract geometric compositions. Imagine the high-stakes emotional gravity of this creative process. Shapiro took the exact materials associated with the romanticized American wedding and the traditional housewife role, and she systematically sliced them apart with industrial shears. She took these fabrics out of the private domestic closet and thrust them onto the public gallery wall, arranging them into massive, exploding fan shapes and fractured triangles. This step-by-step dismantling served as a brilliant abstract interpretation of self-reclamation. It showed that the path out of a suffocating marriage required a literal tearing apart of the fabric of that identity. The artist strips the romanticism away from the material, exposing the structural confinement underneath, and rebuilds it into a monument of individual autonomy. The pacing of this 1980s artistic revolution was relentless, mirroring the high-velocity changes occurring within American society. Artists were no longer hiding their relational trauma. They were weaponizing it to reclaim their narrative history. Look at how the color palettes of this era evolved. The muted, earthy tones of the 1970s minimalist movement were completely replaced by high-contrast, jarring combinations. Toxic neons mixed with deep, bruised blacks and blood reds. This was the visual translation of a psyche operating in pure survival mode. When an individual is navigating the final, chaotic chapters of a split, the emotional spectrum is characterized by extreme highs and lows. The abstract paintings of this decade do not allow for neutrality. They force the viewer to experience the full, unedited weight of the collision. But as the decade of the 1980s drew to a close, this explosive, loud, and violent expression of relational grief began to undergo another profound mutation. The screaming matches on canvas and the physical smashing of domestic objects eventually exhausted themselves, leaving behind a completely different kind of landscape. What happens when the initial fury of the breakup completely burns out, and you are left standing in the absolute, chilly silence of the aftermath? What happens when the legal decree is finalized, the moving trucks have departed, and you must confront the literal physical vacuum of an empty, newly single home? This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the perfect stage for the next critical chapter of our masterclass. In the next part, we will move out of the explosive, paint-splattered studios of the neo-expressionists and step directly into the cool, melancholic, and hauntingly quiet world of the 1990s conceptual art movement. We will uncover how American artists began using empty clothing, isolated domestic appliances, and sterile storage units to map out the silent, step-by-step realities of phantom presence, long-term emotional alienation, and the challenging process of learning to inhabit a space that has been completely hollowed out of its shared history. Michael sits in a living room that used to be full of furniture, books, and noise in the current year 2026. Now, it contains a single chair and a clean patch of carpet where a large media cabinet used to stand. The legal battle is completely over. The shared assets have been divided with clinical precision by the courts, and the quietness within the house is absolutely deafening. This is the precise stage of the divorce journey that historical trends classify as the realization of the void. It is the moment when the artificial adrenaline of the courtroom battles completely fades away, the legal documents are signed, and the individual is left completely alone to confront the physical reality of a fractured life. In U.S. art history, the 1990s became the monumental decade where artists stopped screaming on canvas through aggressive paint strokes and instead started mapping this exact, crushing silence. They turned heavily to conceptual art, an approach where the overarching idea behind the work takes absolute precedence over traditional craftsmanship, using everyday household objects to explore the devastating reality of what is no longer there. To understand how this era of art history provides a lifeline for individuals navigating modern separations, we must examine how the absence of a partner becomes a tangible material in 1990s conceptual installations. When a marriage ends, the domestic space undergoes a profound chemical change. Objects that once signified comfort, partnership, and shared routines suddenly transform into haunting reminders of loss and structural failure. The 1990s conceptualists understood this perfectly, and they began isolating domestic appliances, structural elements, and architectural fixtures to create profound case studies of emotional alienation. Let us look closely at a vital historical case study involving the legendary American sculptor Robert Gober. Throughout the late 1980s and the entire duration of the 1990s, Gober created a series of sculptures modeled after ordinary household sinks. However, these were not ready-made items purchased from a standard hardware store. If we analyze his creation process step by step, we can see a deliberate deconstruction of the domestic sphere. In step 1, Gober meticulously handcrafted these sinks entirely from scratch using plaster, wire mesh, wood, and layers of semi-gloss enamel paint. This gave the surfaces a strange, slightly irregular, human-like quality that mirrored the texture of skin. In step 2, he deliberately omitted any form of plumbing, faucets, spigots, or running water. In step 3, he mounted these dry, silent, and completely non-functional basins directly onto the stark white walls of galleries and museums. When we evaluate the potential outcomes of viewing Gober's sinks through the lens of a dissolved marriage, the psychological resonance is staggering. A sink is the ultimate site of domestic maintenance, purification, and intimate daily routine. It is the place where a couple washes their hands, brushes their teeth alongside one another in the morning, and cleans up after preparing shared family meals. By presenting a sink that is entirely non-functional, severed from any water source or drainage system, Gober strips the object of its life-giving utility and transforms it into an abstract monument to domestic paralysis. The empty basin becomes a literal drain for memory, a visual representation of a household that has been functionally unplugged from its emotional power source. For a modern individual like Michael in 2026, walking through the quiet aftermath of a split, Gober's sculptures accurately mirror the sensation of inhabiting a space where the invisible infrastructure of companionship has been completely disconnected, leaving behind nothing but the cold stone shells of forgotten habits. Let us transition to another vital historical case study from the 1990s that beautifully addresses the concept of the phantom presence, the work of Felix González Torres. Although his minimal and conceptual installations frequently address the profound grief and loss associated with the contemporary health crises of his era, his brilliant abstract methodologies offer an incredibly precise lens for analyzing the slow, agonizing divergence of two interconnected lives. Consider his iconic 1991 installation titled Untitled, Perfect Lovers, featuring two ordinary, identical battery-operated commercial clocks mounted side by side on a wall, their frames touching each other. At the beginning of the installation, the clocks are set to the exact same second. Over days, weeks, and months, the potential outcomes of this mechanical pairing become entirely inevitable. Because no two commercial batteries drain at the exact same rate and no two mechanical movements possess absolute mathematical identity, the clocks slowly but surely begin to fall out of synchronization. One clock ticks a microscopic fraction of a second slower than its partner. Eventually, the minute hands point to entirely different numbers, and the absolute alignment they once shared is permanently lost to time. This simple, elegant conceptual gesture provides a masterclass in the step-by-step reality of relational divergence. When a marriage begins to fail, the dissolution rarely happens in a single cataclysmic instant. Instead, it precisely mirrors these twin clocks. For years, the partners move in perfect harmony, sharing the same schedule, the same domestic spaces, the same financial goals, and the same daily life rhythm. But slowly, imperceptibly, an internal desynchronization occurs. One partner begins to think, feel, or evolve at a slightly different velocity than the other. They are still touching, they are still living in the same house, but their internal mechanisms are no longer in alignment. By the time the legal separation officially occurs, the divergence has become total and undeniable. González Torres' clocks capture the quiet, non-violent tragedy of watching someone you love drift onto a completely different temporal plane, highlighting the profound emotional alienation that defines the middle to late stages of the divorce journey. To further understand how 1990s conceptual art processed this alienation, imagine another scenario involving an American woman named Lisa in the current year 2026. Lisa is tasked with cleaning out the master closet after her husband of 15 years has officially moved his belongings into a separate apartment. She is left confronting rows of empty plastic hangers, a vacant shoe rack, and the lingering ghostly scent of his presence trapped within the wood grain of the drawers. In the 1990s, American conceptual artists began utilizing actual clothing and textiles to represent this devastating sense of human absence. They would cast empty garments in industrial materials like plaster or resin, or arrange them in sterile, repetitive configurations on the floor to emphasize the heavy phantom presence of a missing person. When a partner departs a shared home, they do not merely remove their physical body from the premises. They leave behind an emotional vacuum that cracks the domestic narrative and actively distorts how the remaining partner perceives physical space. The home ceases to function as a protective shelter and transforms instead into a vast archive of missing elements. Conceptual art during this decade excelled at visualizing this specific negative space. We see this rooted in historical trends where artists like Bruce Nauman cast the empty areas underneath chairs, creating solid concrete monuments out of the void. The potential outcomes of this artistic strategy are deeply moving for anyone navigating a separation. By giving a physical, permanent body to empty space, the artist makes the loneliness tangible and heavy. They show that the absence of a spouse is not merely an abstract psychological feeling, but a heavy weight that occupies the literal square footage of the house, forcing the individual to physically navigate around the void every single day. This step-by-step processing of the vacuum is a mandatory and critical phase of the healing journey, a historical trend that underscores the ultimate resilience of the human spirit. You cannot successfully rebuild a new identity until you have fully confronted and measured the architecture of the void left behind. The 1990s conceptualists provided the United States public with a revolutionary method to objectify their grief, allowing them to look at their empty rooms not as a shameful sign of personal failure, but as a shared, deeply human cultural experience. They proved to the world that silence could be shaped, that absence could be measured, and that the mundane domestic objects left behind could be transformed into profound instruments of self-examination and ultimate transition. But as the 20th century drew to a final close and the American public stood on the precipice of a brand new millennium, the nature of human connection and disconnection underwent its most radical technological evolution yet. The physical vacuum of the empty home, the silent closets, and the non-functional sinks of the 1990s were about to be abruptly invaded by a hyper-connected, hyper-monitored digital landscape. The analog silence of a missing partner was about to be replaced by the glowing screens, algorithmic data tracking, text message logs, and digital footprint erasure of the early 2000s. This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the stage for the next critical phase of our masterclass. In the next part, we will leave behind the quiet analog rooms of 1990s conceptualism and plunge headfirst into the fast-paced, fragmented, and highly technological world of the early 2000s internet boom. We will discover how American new media artists began using digital static, corrupted data streams, and dismantled communication networks to map out the modern step-by-step realities of electronic alienation, online asset tracking, and the terrifying process of completely erasing a shared digital existence from the internet forever. The dawn of the 21st century brought an entirely new infrastructure to the American domestic experience, shifting the landscape of marital dissolution from physical spaces to the invisible, unyielding architecture of servers, hard drives, and fiber optic cables. To understand the profound depth of this transition, consider an American professional named Rachel, living in the current year 2026. Rachel is sitting in the glow of her laptop screen at midnight, navigating the exhausting clinical process of digital decoupling. She is not sorting through physical photo albums or packing cardboard boxes. Instead, she is systematically unlinking a shared family cloud storage account, resetting passwords to private bank portals, changing the administrative credentials on her smart home thermostat, and watching as the automated memory algorithms of her smartphone casually present curated slideshows of her past life. This is the modern hyperconnected panopticon of separation, where the erasure of a shared life requires a meticulous, exhausting level of electronic asset management. Historical trends reveal that this exact psychological shift began during the early 2000s internet boom, an era when United States artists realized that human intimacy had become entirely digitized, meaning that the collapse of a marriage would henceforth be recorded in corrupted data streams, broken networks, and the terrifying realities of digital footprint erasure. As the internet evolved from a novel communication tool into the very fabric of daily American life, the nature of relational trauma underwent a massive technological mutation. Marital friction was no longer confined to the private rooms of a house or the sterile environments of a family court. It was now permanently archived in email logs, instant messenger histories, and early social media databases. When these relationships reached their breaking points, the legal system in the United States adapted by introducing electronic discovery protocols, turning hard drives and metadata into the primary weapons of adversarial litigation. This historical shift created a new form of psychological trauma, the unyielding digital ghost. For the creative community, traditional paint and physical sculpture were suddenly inadequate to express this virtual alienation. Artists turned instead to new media art, net art, and glitch art, developing a highly sophisticated, abstract vocabulary designed to map the step-by-step destruction of a digitized life. Let us look at a vital historical case study from the early 2000s involving the pioneers of the American glitch art movement. These creators realized that a digital file, whether it is a pristine family photograph or a home video of a wedding, is fundamentally nothing more than a structured sequence of binary code. To express the profound internal devastation of a relational split, they pioneered a technique known as data bending, which serves as a flawless abstract interpretation of marital decay. If we analyze this creative process step by step, we see an extraordinary mirror to the legal dismantling of an estate. In step 1 of this abstract methodology, the artist takes a digital file containing a highly sentimental domestic image and opens it within a raw text editor rather than a standard image viewer. This immediately strips away the romantic illusion of the picture, exposing the cold, clinical alphanumeric strings of code that dictate the position, color, and intensity of every single pixel. In step 2, the artist intentionally injects random, discordant text strings into the middle of this code, or systematically deletes massive blocks of data. This act directly simulates the way an aggressive legal team strips away clauses of a prenuptial agreement or fractures a joint real estate portfolio during mediation. In step 3, the corrupted file is saved and re-rendered back into a visual format. The potential outcomes of this technical manipulation are visually stunning and deeply unsettling. The recognizable representational image of the couple is completely obliterated, replaced by a hyper-abstract landscape of violent horizontal color bands, jagged pixel artifacts, and areas of pure digital static. The figures do not simply disappear. Instead, they are violently pulled apart and scattered across the electronic field, trapped in a permanent state of technological disorientation. For an observer like Rachel in 2026, this abstract glitch art accurately captures the precise feeling of digital asset alienation, proving that when the underlying contract of a relationship is compromised, the shared history is permanently corrupted, leaving behind an electronic void that can never be reassembled into a coherent narrative. Beyond the corruption of individual files, early 2000s American artists began utilizing abstract data visualization to map the sheer velocity and surveillance aspects of modern separation. In 2006, amendments to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure officially formalized the inclusion of electronically stored information in legal disputes, meaning that every text message, location ping, and online purchase could be weaponized in court. This created an atmosphere of intense paranoia within failing households. New media artists responded by writing custom software engines designed to track and abstractly visualize communication networks. Consider the historical trends established by installations that turn text data streams into living, moving abstract sculptures. If we track the software execution step by step, the program imports thousands of lines of real communication data between two separating individuals. In the first phase of visualization, the software maps the frequency and timestamps of the messages, translating them into points of light on a dark screen. In the second phase, linguistic analysis algorithms determine the emotional density of the words, converting hostile arguments into sharp, angular geometric lines that dart aggressively across the space. As the relationship approaches its final legal termination, the abstract network becomes an incredibly dense, suffocating spiderweb of intersecting paths. The colors violently shift from soft, calm blues into harsh, glowing neon reds and blinding whites, providing a cold, mathematical, yet deeply emotional chart of a psychological collapse. The artwork strips away the literal words of the arguments, leaving the viewer to confront the raw, terrifying architecture of a severed connection. This era of U.S. art history proves that the early 2000s digital boom did not minimize the pain of the divorce journey. It amplified it by making the loss permanent, searchable, and hyperanalytical. The physical vacuum of the 1990s empty home was replaced by a new kind of negative space, the digital archive of missing elements, where the individual must manually execute the liquidation of their online existence. New media artists captured this unique modern despair by creating completely blank, humming websites or endless video loops of pure, non-signifying digital noise. The low-frequency hum of an empty server became the late-night background noise for a generation of citizens trying to find their personal autonomy in a virtual wilderness. These early technological masterclasses provided the United States public with a vital framework to understand that their electronic alienation was a profound historical event. They showed that the act of deleting a digital footprint or watching a data stream fracture was an act of profound creative survival. But as the decade progressed, this initial digital wilderness underwent an even more intense, hypersocial evolution. The private digital folders, the hidden hard drives, and the text logs of the early 2000s were about to be thrust into the public square by the sudden explosion of social media networks and smart device monitoring. The quiet process of digital decoupling was about to become a hyper-visible, public spectacle of algorithmic tracking and collective observation. This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the stage for the next critical chapter of our masterclass. In the next part, we will move out of the early digital era of glitch art and step directly into the hyper-monitored algorithmic trap of the 2010s social media revolution. We will discover how American performance and conceptual artists began using live data tracking, public profile deletions, and weaponized timelines to map out the modern, step-by-step realities of public decoupling, algorithmic surveillance, and the ultimate challenge of maintaining personal dignity when your private heartbreak is converted into a viral public spectacle. This hypervisible public spectacle became the defining psychological landscape of the 2010s, an era when the private trauma of marital failure was completely uploaded into the unyielding machinery of the attention economy. To understand the sheer velocity of this shift, imagine an American man named David living in the current year 2026. David is sitting in a coffee shop, staring at his smartphone, navigating the absolute finality of a modern divorce. He is not just dealing with the physical distribution of property or the clinical signing of legal decrees. He is actively trapped in an algorithmic panopticon. Every time he opens an app, the platform demands that he redefine his digital existence. He must decide when to change his public relationship status, an action that instantly triggers a cascade of notifications to hundreds of acquaintances. He must watch as the platform systematically unfurls a historical archive of his entire marriage, served up as automated anniversary memories, while simultaneously suggesting that he unfriend or block individuals who were once his primary social support network. David is realizing that in the modern United States, a relationship does not merely die in private. It is systematically dissected, processed, and broadcasted by automated software engines that convert his deepest personal grief into engagement metrics. Historical trends during the 2010s demonstrate that this exact intersection of technology, publicity, and emotional trauma became the primary raw material for a new wave of American conceptual and performance artists. They recognized that the traditional, isolated domestic space had been completely shattered by the social media timeline. The divorce journey was no longer a hidden, quiet migration through empty rooms. It had become an active, curated performance that the public watched in real time. To capture this hypervisible alienation, these artists stopped using traditional materials altogether. They began treating the user interface itself, along with scraped metadata, public text archives, and algorithmic tracking code, as the definitive medium for a new era of abstract interpretation. Let us look closely at a monumental historical case study from the mid-2010s that perfectly maps the step-by-step weaponization of the digital timeline. An innovative American conceptual artist embarked on a project that involved the absolute, unedited extraction of every single digital interaction between two spouses during the final 6 months of their marriage. If we analyze the execution of this massive data installation step by step, we can see how the artist managed to transform cold, binary metrics into a devastatingly profound abstract landscape. In step 1, the artist utilized custom data scraping software to collect over 50,000 individual points of communication data, including timestamped text messages, emails, location check-ins, and social media comments exchanged between the separating couple. In step 2, the artist stripped away the literal representational words of the arguments to comply with privacy frameworks, leaving behind nothing but the raw metadata. This meant the text was converted into long strings of alphanumeric timestamps, character counts, and geographic coordinates. In step 3, this massive archive of broken intimacy was routed into a high-powered multi-channel projection system inside a stark, blacked-out museum gallery. The potential outcomes of this technical abstraction were completely overwhelming for the viewer. Instead of reading a literal story of a breakup, the audience stood in the center of a roaring, blinding waterfall of pure digital information. Thousands of lines of glowing white code cascaded down the walls at a frantic, unreadable velocity. When the couple engaged in a high-stakes, late-night text message battle, the projection walls would light up with dense, aggressive clusters of hyper-accelerated data streams, pulsing with a toxic, low-frequency electronic hum. When the relationship experienced periods of icy, hostile silence, the room would instantly plunge into a terrifying, pitch-black void, interrupted only by the slow, rhythmic blinking of a single location tracker. This case study proved that by abstracting the literal text into pure data, the artist had created a flawless visual monument to the psychological exhaustion of modern communication warfare. It showed that the 2010s divorce journey was characterized by an inability to escape the digital echo chamber of the past, where every single historical interaction is permanently archived, indexed, and weaponized against the emotional recovery of the individual. Simultaneously, the 2010s witnessed a radical evolution in how performance art addressed the concepts of identity erasure and public curation during a relational split. Artists began treating their own public social media profiles as living, breathing abstract canvases, executing what historical trends now classify as the performance of the corporate self. Imagine the immense psychological strain of this process. An artist would meticulously document the slow step-by-step unraveling of their real-world partnership entirely through subtle, abstract adjustments to their online aesthetic. We see this rooted in historical trends where creators would gradually systematically drain the color saturation from their public family photographs over a period of months, causing their spouse to slowly fade into a ghostly, translucent outline long before any public announcement was made. They would deliberately introduce digital artifacts, corrupted compression algorithms, and intentional layout glitches into their shared timelines. This was a brilliant, subversive commentary on the absolute artificiality of the curated American lifestyle. By forcing the pristine, highly polished user interfaces of major social platforms to glitch and buckle under the weight of real human suffering, these artists exposed the deep, irreconcilable chasm between the sanitized public image and the raw, bleeding reality of an imploding home. The act of clicking the block button or permanently deleting a joint account was elevated to a piece of radical, high-stakes performance art, a digital suicide of the shared identity that left behind a clean, terrifyingly empty screen where a life used to exist. For our modern observer David in the year 2026, analyzing these 2010s masterclasses offers an incredibly liberating realization regarding the potential outcomes of his own digital decoupling. It teaches him that the intense disorientation he feels while navigating his phone is not a personal failure, but the natural consequence of living in a society that has commodified human intimacy. The abstract data artists of the 2010s provided the United States public with the visual tools necessary to objectify and understand this hypervisible alienation. They showed that by taking control of the data, by twisting the code, and by treating the digital footprint as an artistic medium, the individual can begin to reclaim their personal narrative from the tight grip of the corporate algorithm. They proved that the timeline could be conquered, that the digital ghost could be contained, and that the modern screen could be transformed from a site of public surveillance into a sanctuary for creative rebirth. But as the hyper-connected decade of the 2010s drew to a close, the nature of human separation was about to be pushed into its most extreme, isolated, and legally complex configuration yet. The public timelines, the data streams, and the social media spectacles of the smartphone era were about to collide headfirst with a global crisis that would permanently alter the physical and legal geography of the United States. The hypersocial visibility of the 2010s was about to be replaced by the absolute, enforced physical confinement, the remote video court hearings, and the decentralized, blockchain-driven asset tracking of the early 2020s post-pandemic landscape. This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the perfect stage for the next critical chapter of our deep dive masterclass. In the next part, we will leave behind the public social media feeds of the 2010s and step directly into the surreal, isolated, and highly digitized world of the pandemic-era divorce boom. We will uncover how modern American artists use split-screen video abstractions, encrypted ledger visualizations, and claustrophobic interior installations to map out the contemporary, step-by-step realities of remote legal warfare, decentralized financial division, and the ultimate psychological challenge of legally dismantling a marriage while trapped entirely within the absolute isolation of a lockdown home. This sudden enforcement of physical containment completely rewrote the playbook for both domestic dissolution and American creative expression. Imagine an American corporate executive named Elena living in the current year 2026. Elena is attending a contemporary art exhibition in Chicago, standing before a towering multi-channel video installation that dominates an entire wall of the gallery. The artwork consists of a fractured grid of high-definition monitors, each displaying hyper-abstracted, pixelated streams of digital noise, color bars, and buffering icons that periodically resolve into the faint, unrecognizable outlines of human faces. To the casual museum-goer, this piece might appear to be a generalized critique of the Zoom era or a formal study in digital latency. But for Elena, who lived through the intense, claustrophobic reality of a pandemic-era separation, this installation acts as an incredibly precise, historical mirror. She is looking at the visual language of the 2020s post-pandemic divorce boom, an era when the family court system in the United States abruptly abandoned its physical courtrooms and forced citizens to litigate the absolute destruction of their marriages from their kitchen tables via remote video feeds. Historical trends from this tumultuous period reveal a staggering psychological phenomenon. For the first time in modern history, couples who had decided to legally separate were trapped together by public health lockdowns, forced to inhabit the exact same square footage while actively dismantling their shared lives through remote legal warfare. The home was no longer a sanctuary. It became a hyper-surveilled, multi-tiered digital battlefield. When the legal system transitioned to remote hearings, the intimate, agonizing details of asset division, custody disputes, and property liquidation were reduced to flat, pixelated squares on a computer monitor. This clinical digitalization of trauma sparked an immediate revolution in U.S. art history. Artists realized that the traditional methods of representing domestic life were completely obsolete. They turned instead to split-screen video abstractions, algorithmic data streams, and claustrophobic interior installations to map the step-by-step realities of this newly decentralized alienation. Let us analyze a profound historical case study from 2021 that perfectly captures this split-screen reality. A prominent New York media artist created a landmark multi-channel video installation that serves as the definitive abstract interpretation of remote legal warfare. If we examine the construction of this artwork step by step, we can see how it strips away the literal details of a legal dispute to expose the raw, underlying psychological mechanics. In step 1, the artist recorded 2 simultaneous separate video feeds of an anonymous couple participating in a mandatory state-ordered remote mediation session from different rooms within the same house. In step 2, the artist applied custom software filters that systematically stripped the representational clarity from the video, converting the high-definition footage into a hyper-abstracted landscape of shifting compression artifacts, color-blocked pixels, and violent green digital tracking lines. In step 3, the audio track was manipulated so that the literal words of the legal arguments were completely erased, replaced instead by the amplified, low-frequency hum of server fans, the sharp clicks of computer keyboards, and the jarring rhythmic static of digital audio drops. When we evaluate the potential outcomes of this technical manipulation, the depth of the work becomes undeniable. By projecting these 2 corrupted feeds onto opposite sides of a single freestanding gallery wall, the artist forced the viewer to physically walk back and forth between the monitors to experience the complete work. The installation perfectly captured the profound emotional vertigo of remote litigation. The digital lag and buffering wheels became visceral physical stand-ins for the agonizing pauses, the unyielding tension, and the complete lack of human empathy that characterizes a remote court proceeding. It showed that the early 2020s divorce journey was defined by a terrifying paradox. You were physically closer to your adversary than ever before, yet emotionally separated by a vast, unyielding digital chasm that reduced your entire life history to a series of fragmented data packets. Simultaneously, the early 2020s witnessed a massive shift in how the financial and asset division chapters of the divorce journey were visualized by American conceptual artists. With the rapid rise of decentralized finance, digital banking, and complex online portfolios, the act of tracing and dividing a marital estate became an incredibly complex, abstract investigative process. Courts were suddenly tasked with analyzing encrypted digital ledgers, virtual property deeds, and complex automated transaction histories to determine equitable distribution. Consider the historical case studies of artists who began utilizing financial data tracking code to generate massive, monochrome abstract prints. If we trace this creative process step by step, The artist begins by inputting the raw ledger data from a highly contested, multi-million-dollar asset dispute into a custom algorithmic rendering engine. In the first phase of processing, the software translates every single transaction node, asset transfer and bank liquidation into a precise geometric point in a virtual three-dimensional space. In the second phase, lines are drawn between these points based on the velocity and frequency of the transfers, creating a dense, blindingly complex web of intersecting vectors. In the final phase, the software strips away the dollar values and account numbers, freezing the entire network into a cold, minimalist and hyper-detailed abstract composition. The potential outcomes of this artistic strategy are deeply moving for anyone navigating a modern separation. The artwork functions as a clinical, unfeeling map of asset alienation. It visualizes the exact moment when the shared material history of a marriage, the homes purchased, the investments made for a joint future, are permanently stripped of their emotional meaning and converted into a sterile mathematical matrix. The canvas ceases to be a decorative object and transforms instead into a structural blueprint of a contract being systematically shredded by automated software. It proved to the United States public that the contemporary divorce journey was as much about the manipulation of data as it was about the processing of grief. This era of U.S. art history also excelled at capturing the profound claustrophobia of shared space through radical interior installations. Artists would take ordinary domestic furniture and physically fuse it with industrial plexiglass partitions, or use high-visibility hazard tape to draw rigid, unyielding borders across the floors of recreated apartment spaces. This step-by-step compartmentalization of the home served as a brilliant abstract interpretation of the survival mechanisms required to navigate a lockdown separation. It showed that when the legal system slows down and physical escape is impossible, the individual must transform into an architect of absolute boundaries, dividing a single room into separate, sovereign territories to preserve their psychological integrity. These pandemic-era masterpieces demonstrate that despite the absolute isolation and the clinical coldness of the digital landscape, American artists continue to find revolutionary ways to build a historical record of human resilience. They showed that the computer screen, the Zoom grid, and the data ledger could be conquered and converted into powerful instruments of self-examination. But as we move out of this era of enforced isolation and step directly into the contemporary landscape of the mid-2020s, the divorce journey undergoes its final, most triumphant transformation. What happens when the court orders are finally signed? The digital assets are completely unlinked, the physical confinement ends, and the individual steps out of the domestic wreckage into the blinding light of total autonomy. This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the perfect stage for the next critical chapter of our deep dive masterclass. In the next part, we will leave behind the claustrophobic digital grids of the pandemic era and step directly into the expansive, triumphant, and radically vibrant world of contemporary post-divorce abstraction. We will discover how modern American artists are using massive scale, exploding color fields, and deeply intuitive physical gestures to map out the contemporary step-by-step realities of radical self-reclamation, post-traumatic growth, and the exhilarating process of building an entirely new, uncompromised identity from the ground up. This radical reclamation is precisely what defines the current cultural moment in the United States. Imagine an American citizen named Marcus living in the current year 2026. Marcus has survived the entire gauntlet of the modern separation process. He has endured the exhausting courtroom litigation, the cold mathematical division of assets, the complex unlinking of his digital footprint, and the deep, heavy silence of the initial empty home. The final legal decrees have been stamped, the assets have been distributed, and the logistical warfare has completely ceased. Marcus walks into a contemporary art museum in Los Angeles and finds himself standing before a monumental canvas that spans over 20 feet across. The painting does not contain the jagged, bleeding lines of mid-century marital panic. It does not feature the sterile, unyielding steel grids of the 1970s property divisions, nor does it present the haunting, hollow voids of the 1990s conceptual installations. Instead, this modern masterpiece is an absolute explosion of radiant cadmium yellows, deep uncompromised turquoises, and massive sweeping arcs of pure kinetic energy that rise up across the surface like a newly formed mountain range. For Marcus, this artwork represents the final, triumphant chapter of his journey. He is witnessing the visual language of contemporary post-divorce abstraction, a movement in U.S. art history that maps the step-by-step reality of radical self-reclamation, post-traumatic growth, and the exhilarating process of building an entirely new identity from the ground up. Historical trends in the mid-2020s indicate a profound shift in how the United States public conceptualizes the aftermath of a marital split. The old societal narratives of permanent stigma, personal failure, and lingering bitterness have been systematically replaced by a widespread cultural understanding of divorce as a vital evolutionary catalyst for self-actualization. Modern psychology defines this phenomenon as post-traumatic growth, a state where individuals who have navigated a profound life crisis do not merely return to their baseline level of functioning, but instead develop an entirely new, vastly expanded capacity for joy, autonomy, and creative expression. The contemporary American art world has become the primary laboratory for visualizing this psychological rebirth. Contemporary abstract artists are utilizing massive scales, unconventional material layering, and intensely intuitive physical gestures to create profound case studies of human resilience. To fully comprehend how this stage of liberation is codified onto the canvas, we must analyze the specific creative methodologies utilized by contemporary abstract painters step by step. In step 1 of this transformative artistic process, the creator begins with a surface that has already been heavily worked, scarred, or structurally altered by previous compositional attempts. Rather than discarding the damaged canvas or attempting to completely erase the underlying textures, the artist intentionally leaves the old fissures, scores, and paint ridges exposed. This choice mirrors the psychological reality of the individual who has completed the divorce path. They realize that their history cannot and should not be deleted. The past scars are integrated into the fabric of the self. In step 2, the artist applies transparent glazes and highly luminous, iridescent mediums directly over the old, fractured topography. By running bright, translucent colors through the deep grooves left by previous palette knife scrapings, the artist transforms the literal sites of past trauma into conduits for light. The potential outcomes of this technique are visually magnificent. When light hits the canvas, the old cracks do not signify structural failure. Instead, they glow with a multi-layered brilliance, illustrating how personal hardships can be converted into sources of profound wisdom and depth. In step 3, the artist executes massive, uncompromised, and high-velocity physical gestures across the entire breadth of the canvas. They use wide industrial brushes, automated spray systems, or their own bare hands to throw dense fields of vibrant pigment over the old boundaries. These gestures are not chaotic or angry. They are deeply controlled, intentional, and expansive. This step represents the ultimate reclamation of personal sovereignty. The lines do not stop at the edges of a predetermined grid. They actively conquer the space, demanding to be seen on their own terms. For a modern viewer like Marcus in 2026, watching these grand abstract vectors sweep across a monumental surface provides a powerful visual confirmation that his life is no longer defined by the tight, restrictive boundaries of a broken contract, but is instead a wide-open expanse of unlimited personal potential. Let us look at another vital historical case study from the contemporary era involving artists who use layered, non-traditional materials like paper pulp, caulking, and architectural debris to build up the canvas. If we track this process step by step, we see an artist who systematically layers material onto the canvas, lets it dry, then uses heavy industrial sanders to physically rip away the outer coatings, exposing the hidden, vibrant strata underneath. This act of controlled excavation serves as a brilliant abstract interpretation of identity reconstruction. When a marriage ends, the artificial persona that was constructed to maintain the relationship is stripped away. The individual is forced to dig deep beneath the social expectations and the legal classifications to rediscover their authentic, core self. The resulting artwork is a dense, deeply textured, and hypercomplex landscape where every single layer tells a story of survival, excavation, and ultimate self-discovery. The pacing of this contemporary artistic movement is defined by an absolute refusal to compromise. The colors utilized by these modern creators completely reject the muted, apologetic tones of past eras of grief. They turn instead to highly saturated, life-affirming palettes that radiate a sense of pure vitality and forward momentum. This visual strategy accurately reflects the potential outcomes of long-term healing, where the individual transitions away from the hypervigilance of the courtroom and into the expansive freedom of an independent life. The artwork functions as a sanctuary where the viewer can recharge their emotional reserves, proving that the ultimate destination of the divorce journey is not isolation, but a radical, uncompromised return to the world. These contemporary masterpieces show us that the true legacy of American abstraction is its unparalleled ability to provide a safe, nonlinear archive for the most complex transitions of the human spirit. They prove that the chaos of an imploding life can be systematically transformed into a structured record of triumph, showing the United States public that it is entirely possible to stand in the wreckage of a collapsed universe and build a brand new world that is entirely your own. But as we stand before these massive, radiant contemporary canvases, celebrating the ultimate liberation of the individual, we are forced to confront one final, overarching question that binds this entire 10-part masterclass together. How do we take all of these disparate historical eras, the chaotic brushstrokes of the 1950s, the rigid steel grids of the 1970s, the smashed ceramics of the 1980s, the silent conceptual sinks of the 1990s, and the digital glitches of the modern era, and synthesize them into a singular cohesive tool for lifelong human survival? How does the collective history of American abstraction serve as the ultimate definitive guide for navigating the universal human experience of loss, transformation, and ultimate self-mastery? This brings us to an incredible open loop that sets the stage for the grand finale of our masterclass. In the 10th and final part of this series, we will pull back the lens to execute the ultimate synthesis of this entire journey. We will uncover the hidden, universal codes that connect every single era of U.S. art history, revealing how you can use the profound wisdom of these abstract masterpieces to permanently transform your own understanding of personal crisis, decode the hidden architecture of human relationships, and unlock the ultimate blueprint for total creative and emotional liberation. To achieve this ultimate synthesis, we must realize that these 70 years of American creative output are not isolated aesthetic experiments. They form a continuous chronological pipeline of human adaptation, a collective survival strategy that spans generations of United States history. When we view this grand trajectory as a unified whole, we discover that the evolution of abstract art precisely mirrors the evolving legal, technological, and psychological landscape of the American family. It provides the United States public with an alternative, uncorrupted system of documentation. While courts retain the cold administrative logs and hard drives hold the corrupted communication metadata, the lineage of U.S. abstraction preserves the true, unedited blueprint of human resilience. Let us imagine an American educator named Chloe walking through a massive, comprehensive retrospective exhibition in New York City in the current year 2026. This exhibition is completely unique because it is not organized by artist, medium, or region. Instead, it is organized sequentially by the precise emotional and logistical stages of the modern divorce journey. Chloe is exactly 5 years past the finalization of her own highly adversarial legal separation. As she steps through the threshold of this exhibition, she is not merely consuming art history. She is walking through the physical, externalized architecture of her own psychological survival. In the very first gallery, Chloe is confronted by the raw, churning canvases of the 1950s New York School. Here, the historical trends of abstract expressionism manifest as the stage of the internal tremor. Standing before the violent, bulbous fractures of Lee Krasner's prophecy, Chloe remembers the exact phase of her own life when the domestic sphere began to buckle under invisible weight. This room teaches us that the subconscious mind always registers a relational ending long before the conscious mind has the courage to draft a legal petition. The chaotic, nonlinear application of paint served as the only safe container for a United States public that was legally and socially forbidden from expressing domestic misery in the public square. It was the premonition stage, where the velocity of the brushstroke captured the terrifying realization that a foundational structure was about to implode. As Chloe moves into the second gallery, the visual language experiences a sudden, jarring shift into the cold, industrial minimalism of the 1970s. The paint splatters disappear, replaced by the razor-sharp bisections of Gordon Matta-Clark's splitting and the heavy, precarious tension of Richard Serra's prop pieces. This represents the stage of structural cleaving and asset division. This room synthesizes the exact historical moment when no-fault legislation transformed the divorce path into a highly mechanized, corporate litigation process. For Chloe, looking at the perfectly measured, severed halves of a suburban house is a visceral reminder of the day her shared real estate portfolio was liquidated, and her life was forced into a sterile mathematical spreadsheet. The minimalist grid is revealed not as an academic exercise, but as a supreme psychological defense mechanism, a method of drawing rigid, unyielding personal boundaries to keep the chaotic trauma of a separation from completely overwhelming the self. The third gallery plunges Chloe back into the explosive, high-stakes emotional warfare of the 1980s neo-expressionist boom. She stands before the monumental, heavy surfaces of Julian Schnabel's plate paintings, where thousands of shattered ceramic shards are cemented into industrial resin. This is the stage of the somatic rupture. It is the phase of the journey where the clinical sanitization of the court system fails to contain the raw human rage, and the domestic icons of the home are systematically smashed to piece together a new topography of survival. This room demonstrates how American artists weaponize the physical canvas to reclaim their narrative history, proving that the potential outcomes of a profound life crisis can be converted into permanent, unyielding monuments of personal power. Transitioning into the fourth gallery, the noise of the smashed ceramics instantly evaporates, replaced by the chilling heavy silence of 1990s conceptualism. Chloe stands in a stark white room containing nothing but Robert Gober's non-functional, handcrafted sinks and Felix Gonzalez Torres' desynchronized commercial clocks. This is the stage of confronting the void. It is the precise moment in the historical trends of separation where the courtroom battles end, the moving trucks depart, and the individual is left completely alone to measure the negative space of an empty home. This room teaches Chloe that the phantom presence of a departed partner is a tangible, heavy material that must be physically navigated every single day, showing that the processing of absence is a mandatory requirement for true emotional evolution. The final rooms of the exhibition project Chloe directly into the modern technological panopticon of the 21st century. She witnesses the early 2000s glitch art, where family photographs are violently data bent into digital static, followed by the 2010s data visualization installations that convert thousands of hostile text message logs into blinding cascades of raw code. Finally, she stands before the pandemic-era split-screen video works of the early 2020s, which map out the claustrophobic, isolated reality of remote legal litigation via computer monitors. These technological galleries synthesize the contemporary reality of digital decoupling, proving to the United States public that the erasure of a shared digital footprint requires a meticulous level of asset management that can easily induce a state of permanent electronic alienation. When Chloe finally exits the exhibition and steps out into the bright, open sunlight of 2026, she experiences a profound sense of integration and clarity. She realizes that her personal trajectory was not a chaotic anomaly or a shameful failure. Instead, her journey was an active participation in a grand, historic tradition of American creative reinvention. By looking through the lens of 70 years of abstraction, she has been provided with a highly sophisticated, visual vocabulary to understand her past, navigate her present, and claim absolute sovereignty over her future. This is the true ultimate power of U.S. art history. It takes the most isolating, clinical, and devastating chapters of the human experience and transforms them into a universal roadmap for total liberation. The historical case studies we have analyzed throughout this 10-part masterclass prove that abstraction is not an escape from reality, but rather the only medium capable of confronting the sheer scale of personal upheaval. It shows that when the structures of our lives shatter, we possess the innate, creative capacity to gather the shards, redefine the boundaries, and paint a brand new composition on our own terms. But as we close this definitive chapter on the visual architecture of marital dissolution, we realize that the transformative power of American abstraction does not stop at the boundaries of the domestic sphere. What happens when we apply this exact same deep-dive analytical methodology to the next great disruptive crisis of the modern era? What happens when we decode the hidden abstract blueprints of societal transitions, systemic economic reinventions, and the global migration of human identity? This brings us to an incredible high-stakes open loop that sets the stage for our next major investigation. In our upcoming masterclass series, we will leave behind the architecture of the home and plunge directly into the massive, turbulent, and uncharted waters of the American economic identity, uncovering how radical abstract artists have secretly mapped out the step-by-step realities of corporate collapse, wealth redistribution, and the ultimate psychological survival of the individual within the modern financial wilderness.